Running Wild with Christine, Sex, Success, and Other Slippery Rabbit Holes. Welcome to episode 20, the one with the married one. I'm here today with my friend Sophie. Hi, Sophie.
Hiya. Good afternoon, Christine.
Yes. So, guys, we're going to be straight up with you. Yesterday, we already had this conversation, and my equipment failed, and we lost the recording. So,
it sucks because it was a great conversation, but we're gonna try and ramble to the same extent.
Yeah, so we're sorry if we're gonna try to be as natural as possible, but things happen. So the one shitty part about this is that yesterday Sophie told me about how we met because I'd completely forgotten the actual moment of us meeting. So I discovered it yesterday, but let's hear it again.
Yeah, no, it's worth repeating. So basically, Christina and I met in high school.
Yeah.
And Christine was a friend of a friend. And we met between classes one day. And I noticed that she had like a really, really cool side bag with a map of like the underground, or is like a map of Berlin on the side of it. And I was like, oh, it's such a cool bag. It was also like, mid 2000s. It was kind of grungy and awesome. I was like, that's such a cool bag. And you said like, oh, thanks. Like I don't use it. I kind of feel like I need a new bag, so you can have this one. And it just blew my mind of this like person that I just met who was super open and super friendly and totally unattached to material things. And then the second time that we met, you were hanging out with some other friends, like in between classes, again, like 10 a.m. in the morning, and having a really loud, really in-depth conversation about masturbation. So I think that's a pretty good wrap-up of like how I know you. And
oh my God. And it's
who you are.
Because it's like over 10 years ago, and I'm like, I was already like this? Like, what?
Oh, yeah.
I was probably more like this than I am now. Like, teenager me was not a good time. Like, for anyone now, it's like, ooh, that's a lot. Let's leave that where that was.
It was fun. It was fun. So, yeah, we've been friends for a really long time, over a decade. And we've both had quite different stories, but a lot of adventures across the oceans, or I don't know what the line is from your book, but it's like trysts across continents or something like that.
No, I think that's like one of my favorite things about our friendship, and like the way that we were able to stay in touch is like our lives are completely different, but like every now and then we'll be like, oh, let's talk regularly, and like, and then not, and then be like, hey, what's up with you? And then lately, Sophie has always been writing also, and so lately you started writing these like long emails to your girlfriends, and I was just like, I love this. This is the best.
It's actually my plan for later today.
Nice.
So I've been doing some creative writing. Expression, creativity. Writing, so that's been really fun, and I've also been, I was reading your blog since the very beginning, and been like, keep doing this, please. So yes,
no, and I think like it's really nice because I think like organically have had this like relationship where we talk about things, but like for a while there, I think you went through like the equivalent of my Liam phase, like in Vancouver, when I was kind of like doing the same thing on autopilot, like super busy and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And then like because Sophie and her husband recently relocated from Switzerland all the way across to Central America. Mm-hmm. And so I think just before that, you were like, oh my God, I'm moving across the ocean. The fuck? I was like, yeah, but
and you're like, you've been through this.
Yeah. I'm like, haven't you done this? And you're like, no, like I've traveled, but I've never moved. And I was like, I guess so. Yeah, it's not that terrible. Yeah, it's kind of different. Like, I want to say like it's the same, but definitely.
No, it's a new phase for us, and so it's exciting and also bringing out lots of changes within me that I want to share and I want to discuss and hash out with friends that also get it. So
yeah, no, I'm super happy because originally you weren't very enthralled by being on the podcast. It took me like a lot of convincing to get you here.
So I was walking to work the other day and listening to your podcast, and you were having this really interesting chat with Anita, and then you started talking about your friend who was married and you had lots of really interesting things to say, but really didn't want to come on the podcast because she was too scared. And I was like, I hate you.
I was like, not naming anybody.
I can't get out of this now.
So peer pressure works, you guys. This is the bottom line.
Yes, and don't give in to your imposter syndrome. This is moral of the story.
It really is. I think that's basically like our motto of this year is just like,
yes,
do and be, and just let that be okay, whatever that is. But basically the reason why I really wanted to have you on the podcast was because we had a really nice chat a few months ago in Switzerland. I think just during, maybe you were reading my book or just about to, or like there was something to do with that, and you were like, well, honestly, like I've struggled with the opposite of like social pressures, the exact opposite social pressures than me. Because basically you got engaged when you were at 23?
Yeah.
And you got married at what, 24?
24, yeah.
And so that...
Which already now I look back and I'm like, wow, I was so young. But yeah, the whole kind of... the experience that I had was getting married very young was, as opposed to you where people were like, please settle down or please like be in one place. For me, it was like, you're way too young to get married. And
you have not
there was a lot
of
like kind of passive aggressive comments, judgment from people who just thought I was making a big mistake, or or later on that they were kind of like, oh shit, you're married. Like, I mean, kind of implying or with this kind of snap judgment that maybe I was really conservative or religious, or which, you know,
you're not
that I'm saying these are bad things to me, but they're not who I am. So I didn't want to be like put in that box.
Yeah. And I think that was very shocking for me because I know we talk about this where I'm like, oh, the society that we live in is super repressive in the sense that, oh, you're too open. Oh, you're too in the lines. Like, whatever you choose to do is, like, the wrong thing. Like, we're so easy to, like, judge and be very negative towards every lifestyle choice today, I think. And so, but for me, I never really clocked, like, how much of it would come from just, like, wearing a wedding band.
Yeah.
Like...
Yeah, these little things that it's kind of like, yes, it's very socially acceptable to be married, but maybe not when you're 23 and really educated and really educated. I sound a little overdone, but like in the kind of political economic sphere that I was, socializing in, it was actually like started to come out of the acceptability boundaries.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of like, how dare you?
It was an interesting experience, and it was also an interesting experience for like to see how it affected me and how it affected my husband as well, because he was just kind of like, yeah, any other questions? Whereas I felt a lot more like pressure and felt that I had to, conform, or that I was feeling awkward for.
But why do you think that difference is? Do you think that the difference between your reaction stems from like just purely like an individual personality thing, or do you think it's also the fact that maybe his social background and his education might have been more prone to getting married, or like,
I think so. So he's from the Caribbean, from a similar kind of socioeconomic background, but I guess we were in Switzerland, and he was also like hanging out with a lot of people that had come to Switzerland as an immigrant to study.
Yeah.
And so there was like a lot of more of a mixture of immigrant background where family is kind of prioritized in a different way.
Yeah.
So there's different factors to it, but I think also a lot of it was down to confidence and security. Like, and I think it's normal that for young women in their 20s to feel very insecure, and with so many pressures coming from so many different sides. It's definitely something that I'm working through. And when I talk about, like imposter syndrome for not coming on, worried about coming on the podcast, it's because I'm kind of worried about saying the wrong thing and then second guessing myself all the time. Which is something that I'm definitely trying to work on.
No, but I think we all suffer from that to various degrees, obviously. But like for me, this is why I love podcasting in general as a medium. And like I've said this in a few episodes, like I think writing for me is petrifying because it kind of sets things in stone. Like you sent me the long email after finishing my book of like, it was so cute. You were like, this passage, it makes me think of like these like big concepts. And then like you wrote, ¿por qué pendejo did you say that you're not a feminist?
¿Por qué carajo you're not a feminist?
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, no, I am a feminist. But at the time in the book, I didn't identify with the word for various reasons that are explained in the book or not, or that I may explain someday. But that was sort of set in stone, and you could pick up on that and question me. Whereas podcasting, I can contradict myself in 5 minutes, and everyone's gonna be like, "Yeah."
In your last podcast, I really loved. I really appreciate. I don't know if it was your last one or
one of the recent.
When you're talking with
Adam,
your friend who's an actor.
Adam,
And at the beginning, you said, I can't remember what it was, but at the beginning you said something, and then at the end you're like, actually, this is completely opposite to what I said at the beginning of this podcast. And I was like, I'm really glad that you're. It's like so refreshing to hear somebody say, you know what, I'm going to correct myself because I have changed and I have grown in the past 40 minutes of this podcast.
No, but it's true because we're just all trying to do our best. And this is sort of like one of the things also that you and I have discussed quite a bit, because I don't know, it kind of always comes up, these like big topics of like love and marriage and relationships and in the book you picked up this like part where I speak with the old man at the beach, and he's like thankful that he got married young because he's like, if I waited longer and became more and more myself, I wouldn't necessarily have been as able to compromise. Like, is this like social individualism or individualistic culture that we're furthering incompatible with like romance and marriage and sharing your identity with someone? And I think that you had a really good answer to that.
I kind of see it as I think that the romance often gets confused in my personal opinion with this kind of I'm going to find somebody that loves me just exactly the way I am.
Yeah.
For these characteristics of my personality or my preferences, and that kind of gets set in stone. But I think that if you get too attached to these kind of characteristics that are set in stone about your personality, then you're going to be kind of unflexible and stubborn in your relationship and in your relationship with yourself. Right? Yeah. What I think is really beautiful about a relationship is that you can have some like fundamental values that you agree on with the other person, and that kind of is your core, but you're going to be changing throughout your life, and you're going to be shedding some parts of yourself and growing some others, and evolving, and to be able to evolve with somebody else, and to not see yourself as like, I am set in my way and I am this individual person and therefore I could never be with this kind of person. If you see it that way, then you're fucked. But if you see your future with somebody else as like this constant evolving relationship that is obviously going to be the same thing within yourself, right? Like I jolly well hope that in the future I'm not going to be the same person.
Yeah. And I think that for me is like critical, and that's a lot of the stuff that we talked about with Anita and with a lot of my guests on this podcast is the fact that like basically all of us who are on whichever sort of part of the path of like self-development or self-care or sort of like awareness of our being, we're all sort of agreeing that the only constant is change.
Yes.
And
I think that's what's potentially like freaky about a marriage or the concept of marriage, because it kind of implies that you're setting things in stone, but you're not. If you're committed to reevaluating things all the time, like there's so many things that need to be reevaluated within a relationship on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And that's actually a really, really fun part of a relationship. Like, it can be super daunting at times.
Yeah.
But it can be really, really interesting to like sit down and be like, hey, so, you know, is this working for you?
Yeah.
We need to change this, or...
And I think that's also, this is why both of us were kind of like, how are we going to do this podcast? Because it's hard to talk about a functioning relationship. Like,
yes, this was one of my big things holding me back about talking about, as you say.
Because it sounds like you're bragging. You're like, look how we figured it out. And it's like, no, that's not like what we're trying to say. It's just, why do we always talk about crisis? Why do we always... Yeah. I think that's sort of like a signifier of how we treat things. We just let them be until there's a problem, and then we address the problem.
Right.
Instead of like checking in every little bit before there's a problem and doing like preventative maintenance, you know, on the state of like yourself and the state of your relationship, and in general, whichever relationships you are in your life. I think it's worth doing that with everyone, but specifically within a marriage setting, it's I wouldn't mind.
No, and the only thing that you have is today. Like, you go into this commitment, which is, you know, supposedly forever or till death do you part, but that is really not what you have to be focused on. What you're focusing on is today, because that is actually the only tangible thing that you have together. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like a little bit of a contradiction in our society, is that we're so in the instant, like through our phone, through technology, whatever, but then we are never present. Like that, for me, that tension is very hard to explain, because we, you know, like older generations will tell us, oh, but you guys are so impatient and like you need everything right away and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, yeah, but the stimuli are just like overwhelming sometimes.
Oh, like, it's a big thing. And one thing that totally freaks me out is watching couples on their phones in restaurants. This is like one of the things that gets me. That I work in like human rights, and I read on and work on a daily basis with some pretty gnarly topics. But there's one thing up there that really like gets to me, which is people ignoring each other at dinner tables, because I think that's like the fastest way
to let things die.
To just let things slide into nothingness. So and I think, you know, this thing of like older people saying that you're so distracted and stuff, I mean, it's annoying, but it's so true. And we have to learn to like,
we have to actually start. That's right. We have to start dealing with it. We can't just be like, this is it. Like,
this is a problem.
Cool. And then what? Yeah, I just think
I've lost your connection.
Oh, are we back? Have you got
Yes.
Me? Okay, cool. I was just saying, like, for me, I think that's kind of something that I've been sort of starting to think about after, like, conversations with Anita and other people about, like, polyamory and, like, things like that, because I still am, I don't know why I'm speaking in the past tense, but, like, I am worried that I'm either always going to be that girl who falls in love with Liam's of the world and like is completely blind and sort of like loses all sense of herself and sanity, or I'll sort of like partially be into it and always keep an eye out. Like I'm very like hot or cold kind of thing. And so it's interesting to speak with people in alternative relationships, because I'm like, oh, like you're trying to like see what fits for you as an individual and how you deal with this. So I think there's like a parallel almost from that to like the phone and the distraction, because it's like I am actually choosing where I spend my time and my attention, whether it's like, you know, I'm choosing to have dinner with you, so I'm gonna have dinner with you. Like, I can sit on my phone somewhere else, like at another time. And I think it's the same thing with like choosing quote unquote the conventional route of like getting married. It's like for you, it wasn't even conventional. Like, it's not like It always, when I say the word, I feel like I'm sort of furthering this, like, oh, you went the conventional route. It's like, no, in Switzerland, it's not the conventional route at all. Like, to get married at your age within our circles, like, no one was married.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think at this stage I think also that the fact, I mean, yes, it may be conventional, and that is also fine.
Yeah.
Which, and I think that also marriage is something that, like, it's really about what you make it. And it can be as conventional or as non-conventional as you want it to be.
That's true.
But the institution in itself, like, it has a lot of baggage and a lot of, meaning and what we understand from it that needs to be, like, thrown out into the water and never seen again. But there's also things that are, like, still really, really valuable about being married. Like, for example, we're from different countries.
Yeah.
We want to work in different countries. We want to travel. We want to move. And so having the rights to be able to take my spouse along with me to a new job, to be able to convince an employer to process a work permit for him, to be able to, have the right to visit him in hospital. Like, there's a reason that people are fighting for these kind of rights.
Absolutely.
And it does open so many doors for you to be able to live, like, as a family and have that unit protected.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really, really big reason for me, that I was like, I really like you. I really want to hang out with you. I want to, like, protect this in a way that we can do this in the way that we want to do this.
Yeah.
And that was basically the reason. And so, yeah, it's conventional and it's not conventional, and it is what it is,
Yeah. But I wonder, do you ever think about, like, why, and we've never talked about this, but do you ever think about, like, maybe how it's just, like, part of the label, like, craze that we're part of as well, is, like, to sort of, I feel like we're aware now that the social constructs and the words that we use to describe them have an effect on our lives. I think that's something that we sort of, like, from the postmodernist or pro-structuralist critique, is something that we are starting to just have in our consciousness. But at the same time, I'm like, are we just creating more of these? Like, are we, because I don't like the fact that we, this is kind of hard to say with the words because they fight against me. But, like, in the sense that if you keep the word married with all of its baggage, and you try to deconstruct it and sort of, like, reappropriate it for yourself, does that actually change anything? Because we're just, like, essentially just fighting with the words. Like, I think the attitude is more, for me, it always kind of boils back down to the individual, like, path that we all need to start, like.
Right, but then also the actions behind it. So what does it mean to have, like, a properly equal feminist marriage in this day and age? Like,
yes,
that it's not about, whether we change the words or whether we it's about how we act within the union, right? It's about really understanding what an equal relationship is.
I mean, it's so
and I think that's something that I like. It's one of my favorite things to work with. Like, I mean, I did not sign up to this so that I could be a wife that takes on more roles and more work in the house or emotional labor, which is something that a lot of people have been talking about lately. It's not something I signed up for, and I think we're moving towards better, kind of more equal relationships, but there's so much in our history and in the way that we've been brought up that we need to cut the cords with.
I think that's a very difficult process as well. Like yesterday when we were taping the lost tape, you were like, well, yeah, like as a married couple, we had to sort of like decide how we want to do like Christmases and celebrations, and like how do we incorporate sort of the way that we've been taught things are done, but obviously we were taught differently. And I think that's very interesting for me, because I think that's also like the avenues where you define whether your marriage is equal and feministic and all that. It's in those little moments of like, all right, like stupid ass, like what recipe do we use for, like, you know, it's in the details that it expresses.
And about kind of understanding, it was like your conversation with Anita. A lot of it is about an understanding your expectations and your needs. And your priorities, right? So I think there's a lot of default modes that you can fall into. Like the woman is the one that's going to know how to decorate the house because she's going to have better taste.
Yeah.
Or these kind of like little insidious things that creep into your relationship, just because even though you try, you know, your best to be modern and feminist, these things are like they've been drilled into our minds, right? And so for me it's a lot about having a clean slate and be like, okay, this is really important to me, but I don't necessarily know more about it than you, or I don't necessarily take precedence over you. And then that also translates a lot to like how division of labor in the house, because I think a lot of the whole women do so much more emotional labor is that also I think a lot of the time women expect men to be total idiots.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, they can't do that. I have to take charge. I have to micromanage, and I have to do so much more work.
We put so much pressure.
If I leave it to the other person, this guy is just going to screw this up. And I think that is just
toxic.
I mean, I don't know whether women are dating children or whether this is, you know, it's actually a problem, but
where the root is.
It would be really good if we could all kind of act like adults and assume that the other person is equally as competent.
Yeah.
And if not, to help out, you know?
Yeah. And I think I'm like the prime offender of this. Like I'm horrible. Like when I lived with Liam, I literally did everything and I was like, he didn't even notice and he didn't even ask. And then like lately when I'm looking at like the stuff and I'm like back at my mom's house, for example, and I can hear her be like, it would be nice if for once you took like initiative and just like clean something that you noticed wasn't clean without me asking you. And I was like, oh my God, this is where this comes from.
Yes.
I'm like, this is where this comes from. It's this constant like, everything matters and you're in charge of everything, and it's actually quite a good like sort of feminist lesson of like, you got to be able to do it all on your own, which I sort of completely adhere to, but be able to and have to are two very different things. Like,
I mean, ideally you're two competent individuals that can run a household by yourselves and do your best to divide the labor so that it's enjoyable / manageable.
Yeah. I
mean that's how ideally it works, but then there's a lot of like patterns that we've learned on how to take over or how to, you know, communicate passively aggressively about how you want the other person to do something. And
oh my God.
It's hard. I'm not saying I am very good at it, but it is definitely something that I don't think has a place in what is an equal modern marriage.
Yeah. And I liked what we said yesterday about communication. Like you were saying what it looks like for you and your husband to just be like, okay, how do you, like, I can't remember the words that you used, but you were like, this is what a like communication channel looks like for us.
Yeah, basically that you just can't assume that the other person can read your mind. And
it's
to
simple
just be
when you put it
very
like that.
clear that like this is what I need and this is really important to me. And how can we like do this so that also what you need and what is important to you is I think also that we're two people that like really value our time on our own and our own projects and our own creative projects. And so being able to like live together but then also live as individuals is really important to both of us.
And I think it should be important to more people. Like I'm not prescribing any kind of thing, but like there is something to be said about like your own individual happiness sort of like completely transpires into everything else that you do, and obviously would transpire into your relationship. Like if you aren't,
I think it's the main indicator of how, you know, like I think you said it before in your podcast, like the other person is not responsible for your happiness.
Yeah.
And also your
Not
happiness is going to affect your relationship.
Yeah. And therefore the arguably working on your own individual project and working on your own self-care and your own self-development is equally, if not more important than whatever values or things you might have agreed upon once in like your relationship, you know. I think that's that's what you guys are working on, and you got right from my perspective as an outsider. I'm like, oh, I love seeing this in action. Like obviously it's not easy and it's not perfect and all of that stuff, but for me it's really like inspiring to watch you guys, how you communicate and how involved he is in a lot of the things that you do. And like, you know, we bumped into each other in London and he was like, oh, tell me more, Christine, like this is da-da-da-da. And I'm like, this is so nice, because you often have those things, like you said, that are ingrained, that it's like the husband of and you're the friend of, so you're not my friend. Like we don't have like, it's like the couple has a relationship with another person, or you know, whereas I feel when I see you guys, I really see two individuals that sort of like just make each other better.
Yeah, and I think that this also, like the flip side of, you know, you're responsible of your own happiness is like also issues within a couple. Like a while back, I had some issues with jealousy, you know, within the couple, and that I like did my best to Sherlock Holmes that issue, and found that it was really, really down to some insecurities that I had, and so it's like this is all an individual issue that I'm projecting onto the couple, and so okay, now that I figured that out, I can like deal with that on my own, and share my journey with you, but it's not actually your responsibility, it's mine.
And I think that's that, you know, as long as that communication is there, like you said, share your journey with him. I think that's where the sort of split with the emotional labor happens. Is like not being like, I'm working this out on my own. It's like, actually, I'm working this out on my own, but I'm going to tell you so that maybe it'll like spurt some other stuff on your end that have nothing to do with my issues. But like, you know, it's that back and forth of like, like, okay, like instead of projecting, it's like ingesting, if like that visual makes sense of just like, I'm going to digest this and then like, you know, make it into something else. And I think that's, but again, I think it's very difficult to speak about this stuff because it sounds super preachy. Like I can hear ourselves just talk, and it's like, oh, this is how, and that's not the point, guys.
No, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like it's all about today, and this is what I figured out today. And then tomorrow I'll have some other opinion. But today it's going well, so you know. this is how you know it's important to be able to like speak freely and discuss.
Yeah, and I think it's like also super brave of you guys. You've done a few big changes, and I remember when we were moving to France with Liam that everyone's like, oh, you're going to be the breadwinner as like the woman. And like, I guess you were getting that as well.
I love your nostril flare that you just did there for the record.
Just like, eye roll, bah, gross. No. Feminism. But I think it all of that stuff, like I catch myself being like rolling my eyes and flaring my nostrils instead of being like, okay, let's open up that door, open up that box, let's have that conversation. Why do you think that, like, you know? Yesterday I think we were sort of like starting to come up on this, is the fact that those kinds of things are, I'm trying really hard right now. What I'm working on is to not blame others for their sort of where they are on their path of like understanding themselves. Yeah. Because I think it's, and we were speaking about this with Anita and a bunch of other people. It's like, how can you not get this? Like, you know, once you've figured out one thing, you're just like, that's it, I know it. And you're like, no, actually, you just figured out one thing.
The more you figure out, the less you know.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's important to like have patience and empathy with all those people who make you frustrated. Like, you know, the like I'm trying to catch that frustration and the whole, why are you prescribing these labels and these frustrations and this baggage onto whatever I'm doing? And actually posing that question.
I think the benefit of the doubt is a great thing
Yes.
to have in any relationship, whether it's romantic or friendship or just acquaintance. Like, you're trying your best and I'm trying my best, and you know,
That's
let's
all we
try
can
and treat each other with kindness, and that's basically like the core tenets of my relationship. Is like, maybe I don't get this right now.
Yeah.
I don't quite understand why you did that or said that, but you know, I'm gonna give you the benefit of the doubt that you're trying to be the nicest person, and so am I, and let's find some common ground.
Yeah, and I think that's basically all that we can do. And I find it really interesting. Like, I love reading your emails as well, because I can see that through your own sort of like, you're like, okay, so I had this question, and then I read a bunch of books, and now I have like more questions. Some of them were answered, but they created like a bunch of new ones. So I'm just gonna be like, and I'm like, essentially, that's what my book is about. Like, what's your book? It's not a how-to. It's not a how not to. It's a shit happened. It's like, and now what?
Now what?
And
Yes.
and I think it's really cool because we don't often have these spaces for that. And I think initiatives like being like, okay, my friends are all on the other side of the planet, so I'm just going to check in with them sporadically with these long emails, and maintain that development of your friendships alongside of your own personal development. Like, I think when you emailed me the email, like, post, like, reading my book, you were just like, okay, let's talk about orgasms. And I don't think we've ever had that conversation before.
No, I mean, probably, but like after a few drinks at some party, which is not really the same thing, right?
No, and I find it fascinating that now, like, the more you do this, the more people, like, creep up out of the woodwork that were already in your life, posing similar, just as interesting questions about things that affect us every day. Hopefully every day.
And vulnerability, creativity is contagious.
Yeah, I think so. It's also, have you had, like, adverse reactions? To suddenly opening up about something to someone?
No, I mean, I've picked like some really good friends. Some friends haven't replied, and some have replied saying, "I'd really like to write to you, but I just don't have the time at the moment," which I think is like, I totally understand that, but I also think is like a kind of sign of our times that we're like, I would really like to sit down and have this conversation with you, even if it's not writing an email, like it's just having a Skype or something, but like I just don't have, an hour is something that's really, we're just like having these conversations seem to be difficult to find the time slot for these kind of things.
But that's just an indicator of like what we qualify as our priorities, and that's like what you were saying, the sign of our times, because if we value, like, even in the corporate culture, like, we value like overachievers and blah blah blah, and like, it's just not part of the equation. It's like work, money, time off, like, like those are the things that we calculate life with, and then self-development is just not in the equation. So even though you might have an hour, you're just gonna turn off your brain from trying to overachieve all the time and like put on a stupid TV show and like not think. Whereas like actually having these conversations it's work, because then you think about it, but it's so much more beneficial, and we just don't prioritize it, or it's not as.
But then at the same time, we have to go back to being like, the benefit of the doubt is that there are different phases in life, and I personally have been through some crazy ass phases where I don't have that hour, because my energy is being spent on something else, and I value that as like a worthwhile thing. So kind of that's the only adverse reaction that I've had. But I've also chosen a very small group of friends. I haven't written a book and made it public.
You will one day, I have a feeling. I was telling you yesterday, I was like, careful with the emails, that's how my book started. But yeah, no, I think I was only asking about the adverse reaction because this is
Have you for your book?
Actually, surprisingly few. I've had people stop reading.
Yeah.
Which I think is more, and mostly with people who know me in real life, like who knew me before the book happened. Because it's really personal, and not everyone wants to know like this many details about someone else, and that I completely understand. I'm like, please, by all means, if you're not comfortable, stop reading. Like, this is not the point. But also I've had some people just, and this is probably projection maybe, like I don't know for a fact because I'm only in my own head, but I could see that a few of the reactions were like, I can't, like, for themselves. Because I don't cut corners, you know, I go deep into my feels in it. And so if you are having feels that you don't want to process, you're not going to want to read certain parts. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And I saw that. Like, I know one of my closest guy friends, he was like, I had to stop.
Okay.
And it had nothing to do with me. Like, I know him enough to know that in this particular instance, he was just like hit too close to home kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes hard to, like, I think that, but that I don't think is an adverse reaction. I think it's just like a symptom that maybe they'll recognize at some point and, you know, go off of it to make something constructive out of it. Mm. But no, I wouldn't say that. I'd say it's created more and more awesome conversations and the podcast and everything. So I really, I do get a lot like of creepiness sometimes. Like that's, let's say, like one of the downfalls, but that's a small price to pay. I think you would get it anyway. Women get that a lot. So
yes.
It's not a reason to accept it or say that it's good or anything. I'm still like, please stop, idiots.
Yes.
But so much good is coming out of it that the little inconvenience for someone who is confident and has a safety net and has all the privilege that I have, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
You know, it might hurt people, some other people way more if it was happening to them. And I think that's really a question just of my privilege.
Yeah. I think there's also something significant to be said about the time that we're living in. That I feel, at least personally, I feel a lot more empowered these days to stand up to crap from creeps.
Yeah.
I feel like in the past few months, there's been so much a sensation of empowerment that I'm a lot clearer about my boundaries, at least personally. And maybe it's also the fact that I've just moved country and I'm dealing with a lot of like new environments. But I have stood up for myself so much more in the past few months than I ever would have done. And I think there's definitely, I feel like I'm riding this wave of like, you know what, we're going to call you out.
Yeah.
So I think
don't get our silence anymore.
Right. I mean, there's so much work to be done.
Yeah.
And also, this is also my privilege of like the place that I am in. I can also call people out.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a very exciting time.
I think so too. And I think it's very interesting also, like because the more I surround myself with people who are open to having vulnerable conversations, the more I see things that I personally have always complained about not seeing, you know, like emotional labor from men and like all of the stuff that I like felt like I didn't see. I see them now. And they're just, I think when you're closed, you won't see it. Like even if sometimes it really isn't there, you still have to be open to the possibility of it being there to receive it. And I think that's sort of like the main lesson of like all of this for me personally is like, we're doing our best one step at a time, but like you said, like with a bit of benefit of doubt and a bit of like, you know, be willing to get rejection or, you know, like just, you know, opening yourself up to greatness and shittiness is the same process. So you just have to like do it anyway. You know what I mean? Like that's the risk-taking part.
You're sounding very Brené Brown right now. I love it.
Brené Brown, if you want to be on a podcast, it would be with pleasure. But yeah, so I think that's kind of where we can sort of wrap it. Do you have Any party?
Hashtag the benefit of the doubt.
Yes. Hashtag, what were we calling it? Vulnerability revolution?
Yes.
But thanks so much for doing this twice.
No worries. Somewhere in the cloud of the internet, there might be a second version of this, but it was fun two times over.
I would really like to get your husband on maybe one day.
Yes, we can, or the three of us, or
Yeah, we should do a panel. Be like your couples therapy by the worst therapist in the planet. Me.
Or no, you can just join one of our endless conversations that we have about deconstructing everything possible.
I love it.
I had so much to do this Sunday, but I spent 3 hours sat on the balcony this morning talking about mainly about biology, but there were some other topics involved.
Yeah, sorry listeners if we lost you right there. This is like a normal thing in Sophie's life of just like random shit just coming up.
Very long conversations, yes.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it was. Thank you so much. And if you want to share do you want to share your blog with our listeners?
Yeah, you can head to one of my blogs.
I'll put them all
in nooksandcrannies.com.
Yes.
I share it with a friend, and that's a little creative space.
Yeah.
And I have a professional blog, but it's a bit more boring, so we'll leave that one.
Yeah, we'll leave that one out. But yeah, I'll tag her in the description. And yeah, basically whatever you do in life, kind of like as the message of all of the other episodes, you're okay. You're doing okay. Like, I guess this is kind of the message of today. You will be fine.
It will all be fine. And today is what you have.
And yeah, be present, I guess. Or try.
Exactly. Or try.
Thank you so much, Soph. You guys have a great weekend. Thank you for tuning in, and speak to you next Friday.
Ciao.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.